Bibliophiles of the internet, my name is Adri, and today I'm here to bring you my May wrap-up. May, as you might know, is Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month here in the US and also the Asian Readathon, and so everything I read, with the exception of one review book, was written by Asian authors. Now, I'll be the first to admit my selection was not as diverse as it could have been. I was mostly sticking to books already on my shelves or books I had to read for review, and I didn't even get to the PI part of AAPI, so I fully recognize that I can definitely improve on that. The good news is that if you're looking to expand your shelves and find more books by Pacific Islander authors, my lovely friend Fadwa recently made an incredible post on their blog with a list of Pacific Islander books across all genres and demographics, and I will link that down below in case you also need that for future reference. May was also a pretty good month in terms of cool stuff. In case you missed it, I did a really fun live show about 1500 Miles from the Sun with Johnny Garzavia and Aiden Thomas, which is fully captioned and will be linked down below in case you would like to watch. I also did a really fantastic pre-recorded interview with H.E. Edgman all about his newly released book, The Witch King. It's one of my favorite author discussions ever, and you can also check down below for that link. So that's what I was up to in May. Some cool stuff, some things to improve on, and with that said, let's get into the books. The first book I read was a novella, and it's called Shell Machines Divide the Earth by Benjanun Sharingdankau. It's an Om Voices queer sci-fi novella written by a Thai author. It's technically a companion story that can be read as a standalone, and it's set on this so-called graveyard star that serves as the backdrop for this gladiator-style tournament where humans pair up with AIs, and after killing every other competitor, the victor is granted one wish. Our main character is Tanarat, a war veteran who is desperate to win so that she can bring back the person she loves the most. Content warnings for gore, graphic injury, references to war and genocide, mentions of homophobia and banishment, brief reference to human trafficking, some exploration of kink, and graphic scenes containing sex. Full disclosure, I found this randomly on Twitter when it was pitched as Killing Eve in Space, so that definitely brought me in along with the premise, and I'll be honest, most of the thematic overtones haven't really stuck with me, but it's just a very plot-forward, action-packed story that reads as badass. It has really interesting, expansive world-building and challenges the boundaries of sci-fi, and especially how we define artificial intelligence. It feels very non-traditional in the best way, and ultimately it's about asking how far you're willing to go in order to get what you want. So it's really interesting to see what these characters are fighting for, what's driving them, and how they justify their actions. What stood out to me the most was how Tanarat's motivation and even her wish changes over the course of the story, because I think that shift speaks to the variability of human nature itself. There's some really wild plot twists as well, and interesting power dynamics that come into play, especially when the person or entity you depend on could kill you at a moment's notice, and it's interesting to see how the characters navigate that dynamic. So I was fascinated, I was drawn into the world, and I had a pretty good time, so I gave this a solid 3.5 stars. And full transparency, after finishing this book, I found out that the author has had a tumultuous past on the internet, and I haven't fully read up on that, so this is not so much me recommending her work as it is me saying, here's a book I read and had some thoughts about, so do with that as you will. Anyways, after that I picked up A Taste for Love by Jennifer Yen. Technically I was sent an e-arc of this by Penguin Teen, but I actually read it from a finished copy I bought for myself. It's an Om Voices YA contemporary romance that's pitched as a Taiwanese-American retelling of Pride and Prejudice mixed with the Great British Bake Off, and that's exactly what it is. It's about Liza, who was raised in her parents' combination bakery/restaurant, and while she and her mom share a love of making food, they don't see eye to eye when it comes to Liza's dating prospects. Her mom insists that she has to date a nice, respectable Taiwanese boy, and when Liza agrees to help her mom run the bakery's annual junior baking contest, she finds out that all the contestants are young Asian American guys her mom has handpicked for her to date. Content warnings for some fatphobic comments, some casual racism, multiple incidents of infidelity, HP references, and a brief mention of sexual assault. This is such a good retelling. It's fun and sweet and exciting, and for those of us who know Pride and Prejudice backwards and forwards, the bones of the original story are definitely there, but it recontextualizes the story in completely new ways. I have to start by talking about the baking, because when you compare a story to the Great British Bake Off, that's a huge promise to make, but this book definitely meets that standard, especially in how it explores food and its cultural and social importance. Traditional Taiwanese and Asian cuisine is literally Liza's family business, and food plays an ever-present role in the story, whether it's family dinner or catching up with friends over boba. Food is the connective tissue between everything and everyone in Liza's life, and there's an emotional component to every dish and confection mentioned in the book. And I love how much detail and focus is put into showing Liza's baking process. Sometimes you don't actually get to see characters in foodie romances cooking or baking, but that's definitely not the case here. There is no doubt that Liza knows exactly what she's doing in the kitchen, and that lends credibility to her character later later in the story when she's judging a baking contest. I have every confidence that she can actually do that because we get to see her bake and creating recipes. I also thought the romance with James, our Darcy character, was actually really sweet. Even though he's protective, quick to judge, and putting up a lot of emotional walls, there's a surprising amount of tenderness to him that was just really endearing. I'm glad he had redemptive qualities and that we didn't have to see him being a jerk for like 80% of the book. I also appreciate how the cultural dynamic adds a layer of complexity to the mother-daughter tension in the story. Not unlike the original Bennett matriarch, Liza's mom is concerned with her daughters finding success and security, but it's not just for the sake of image, but also because of their cultural values. And the tension between Liza and her mom comes from a difference in cultural experiences. The way her parents grew up is very different from growing up as a Taiwanese American in the US, which means they have very different ideas of what success means. I think they end up in a realistic place where they want to respect each other, they're learning, they're trying to see the other person's perspective and be better, and that's really what matters. Overall, I really enjoyed this. It's a fast-paced contemporary romance full of culture, food, family, and love. I do wish the Wickham storyline was a little bit more developed, but I still had a great time reading this and I gave it 4 stars. Then you all know how much I loved Empire of Sand, so I had to listen to Realm of Ash by Tasha Suri, read by Sonila Nankani. This is the sequel/companion to Empire of Sand, and it follows Mer's sister, Arwa, who's been widowed after a horrible accident and now has been taken in by a royal family to whom she pledges her service. She finds herself taken under the wing of Zahir, the disgraced illegitimate prince who's turned to forbidden magic in hopes of finding answers as to how to save the crumbling Amban Empire and retrace the path of their ancestors' past in the magical realm of Ash. Content warnings for references to chronic illness, mentions of suicide attempts and self-harm, physical assault, abuse, references to PTSD and trauma, exploration of imperialism and enslavement, and descriptions of massacres, murder, injury, and graphic violence. I am hesitant to say this, but this might be even better than Empire of Sand, which is exquisite work, and that is really hard to even definitively say because both books are fan-freaking-tastic. Both books in this series are Mughal India-inspired fantasy stories, and I am not taken away from that with what I say next because they are very much that, but I love that the Realm of Ash feels very Inception but make it fantasy because it's a shared dream space you get to by sleeping and you go there to unlock consciousness and ideas. That is not me saying it's a one-to-one comparison by any means. This is a unique story that definitely stands on its own, but it just reminded me of that, and it was cool to see how that kind of dreaming mechanic works within the specific context of this fantasy series. I think Arwa is an incredible character, and her perspective is very different from Mer, who embraces her Amriti heritage and who fights to come into her power and her magic, which she feels entitled to as part of her cultural inheritance. That is very much not Arwa's experience. Arwa has been raised to be a proper noblewoman, to make herself small and hide her magic, to believe that her magic and her culture is a source of shame, and she's been told that she has to give her life to the Empire if she is to survive. When the story begins, she sees herself as a tool meant to uphold this imperialistic empire, and it takes a lot of unlearning and reflection to break out of that mindset. And the story also speaks to the magnetism and cyclical nature of trauma, especially trauma at the hands of cultural erasure and cultural supremacy, and how history is bound to repeat itself if we don't make concerted efforts to change. That's what the story is about. Zahir believes that in order to defeat the Empire, he has to go into the Realm of Ash and see if his ancestors or even past emperors know how the Empire came into power, thinking that if they can reverse engineer that power, they can break free of the Empire using its own tactics. But Arwa is trying to show him that you don't need to give credence to the past in order to move forward. If you replicate the past, you're only doing what's already been done. True change happens when we're brave enough to make our own blueprint, when we have the audacity to imagine something completely new. Just like Empire of Sand, this story is beautiful, emotional, and intricately written and imagined. It blew me away and messed me up in the best way possible. I gave it 4.5 stars. After that, I picked up my arc of Cool for the Summer by Dahlia Adler. This recently came out on May 11th from Wednesday Books. It's an Own Voices queer contemporary coming-of-age story about Larissa, who spent her entire teenage life crushing on golden boy Chase Harding, and he is finally taking notice of her when the school year starts. But the new school year brings a new transfer student named Jasmine, who Larissa may have had a steamy summer fling with, but their friends don't know that they've met before, and Larissa may not be ready to actually admit that she's not straight. Content warnings for some HP references, mentions of parental abandonment and divorce, gaslighting, underage drinking, and some scenes containing sex. I went into this not really knowing much about it, just knowing it would be great because it's by Dahlia Adler, but I think it's important to understand that this story story is not a romance as much as it is a coming-of-age narrative about discovering bisexuality and coming into queerness. That is a tumultuous process, especially for young queer folks, so there's quite a bit of angst and confusion in the story, but I really appreciate its honesty and realistically exploring that experience. Above everything else, I think this story really speaks to the erasure that bisexual people face and experience, especially because there continues to be this pervasive misconception that two complicated things cannot be true at once. That is what Larissa is contending with in this story. The fact that the liberated, confident queer person she became over summer break doesn't invalidate the people, places, and experiences that shaped her growing up, the same way that her feelings for Jasmine don't invalidate her feelings for Chase. This relationship she starts with Chase feels grounding and validating for her because it is validating a part of herself, and because it also represents the way her life is quote-unquote supposed to look like. But at the same time, her romantic feelings towards Jasmine represent another part of herself that she isn't fully ready to claim or confront. I like how the structure of the story itself also echoes the idea of bisexuality because it's split into two parts 2 times over. It's split between past and present, and also Larissa's hometown and her summer break in the Outer Banks. So it's very much about reconciling two seemingly disparate things, the past and the present, the before and the after, the feelings for Jasmine and the feelings for Chase. That literal distance is also really important because it allows Larissa to compartmentalize and to slowly and safely approach her own queerness. It gives her some much needed space to confront how she's been beholden to what is familiar and to what other people are projecting onto her, as opposed to the person she really is when she literally removes herself from those expectations. I think it's an emotional and challenging story about growing pains, about asking to be loved, and about coming into your queerness, and because of that I think it's definitely a worthwhile read, and I gave it a solid 4 stars. Then I finally got a chance to read The Magic Fish by Trung Le Nguyen. It's an Own Voices queer graphic novel about a Vietnamese-American boy named Tien who wants to come out to his parents but doesn't know how, especially when there is no direct translation for the word gay in Vietnamese. He and his parents primarily speak Vietnamese at home together, and to practice their English they read books of fairy tales out loud to each other, and that helps them connect even when they don't have the right words to express themselves. Content warnings for death, animal death, and death of a grandparent, references to post-war Vietnam, allusions to domestic abuse and murder, and some religious bigotry. This is one of my new favorite graphic novels ever. It absolutely gutted me with its beauty, its thoughtfulness, and its softness. It's such a beautifully multi-layered story that shows how storytelling itself is a connective experience that bridges every imaginable difference. The color palette is also really well thought out because the fairy tales are in blue, the flashbacks are in yellow, and the present is in red. That helps you keep everything separate, but it becomes breathtaking when you see how the three connect to each other and bleed into each other in these shared moments and experiences. It's really about how our lives are stories, and stories by definition, change. They change in the telling and with the passage of time. They change to share different ideas or perspectives and reach new audiences. The beauty of stories is that they don't always have to be told the same way. They can evolve into something new and still carry the same message and the same weight. That reflects how Tien and his parents are still connected by their culture and their values, even though their upbringing is very different. I think the story also speaks to how love transcends words and how our truth will always be known by the people who see us and who are truly connected to us. Part of the story is Tien realizing that he doesn't have to find some simplified, uncomplicated way to communicate who he is, and that the people we love can see us for who we are without feeling entitled to understand the parts of ourselves that defy simple explanation. It is so masterfully done, so incredibly tender, and I was full on sobbing by the end. It is such a powerful story. I highly recommend it, and I gave it 5 stars. Then I decided to read my arc of She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. This was kindly sent to me by Tor Books, and it comes out on July 20th. It's an Own Voices queer historical epic set in China starting in the year 1345 when China was under control of the Mongols. Our nameless main character watches powerlessly as her father and brother pass away and decides to take up her dead brother's name, disguise herself as him, and make his prophesied legacy of greatness hers, no matter the cost. She joins a monastery to escape famine and death, and when the monastery is destroyed by the Mongols, she finds herself drawn into the war and positioned as one of the leaders of the rebellion, with a lot of power and possibly even magic. Content warnings for blood, graphic injury, dismemberment, mutilation, torture, murder, and violence, references to slavery and war crimes, misogyny, sexism, and sexist slurs, some ableist language, descriptions of contagious illness, physical abuse, infidelity, and some scenes containing graphic sex. This is one of those books that no matter what I say in this limited space, I will never be able to do it justice because it is so much bigger than any of us. She Who Became the Sun is the queer, feminist, historical epic that we deserve, but are not ready for in any sense of the word. The experience of reading it is so breathtakingly heightened and dynamic, maybe even heady, because it's predicated on the very idea that our fate is a choice that we can make, not merely a chance. It's a story that dares to ask in the boldest, most dramatic fashion imaginable whether destiny is something we're born into or something we make for ourselves. Before I go on, I should mention that our main character takes up the name of Chu Chongba. She presents herself as a man, is read as a man, but she is neither man nor woman, though she does align closer with masculinity, and internally she uses she, her pronouns. So I am not misgendering her, I am using the pronouns that she uses. One of the core tenets of the story is about the emphatic reclamation of desire and agency. Chu's desire has been denied to her pretty much since birth. She was raised to be a woman and told that women's lives and choices will always be secondary to men, and then she was told that monks have to set aside their earthly desires in service of the gods and the heavens. Growing up, there was no room for her to parse who she is or what she wants, and she was resigned to a life of service and obscurity where a meaningless death was the greatest thing she could hope to aspire to. But that's simply not good enough for her, even though that's her destiny assigned to her by both fate and circumstance. Instead, she chooses to defy everyone's expectations and fight for her right not only to live, but to be great. She dares to recognize that she has more than just the capacity to survive. She has the ability to be powerful, and a part of her longs to be seen and known in every way that matters. Ultimately, I think this story is about the power of difference, because just by existing, Chu is reconciling so many different perspectives, and her true success comes from being able to understand the world through so many different lenses. She presents as a man, passes as a man, and feels aligned with masculinity, but the way she is a man is inherently different from people who were raised to be men, and that contradiction brings so much more fullness to how she sees and understands the world. As a person, as a soldier, as a man, she is unprecedented, and therefore she is able to do impossible things simply because these expectations and prophecies fail to take her very existence into account. This is going to sound so unrelated, but it reminds me of my favorite line in The Matrix, where Trinity tells Neo, "No one has ever done anything like this," and he responds, "That's why it's going to work." So it's about how there is strength and power in difference, but also in some cases how differences create a chasm that's too great to bridge, too impossible to reconcile, and you see both instances playing out over the course of the book. In the end, I feel like this story asks what it looks like to know your worth and pursue it with every breath left in your body, even as the world tells you a different story, even if your path ends in sure destruction. It is an epic, emotional, dramatic narrative tapestry that is every bit as tragic as it is triumphant, and it is such an intimate portrait of a character fighting for her right to exist. By the end, it's so clear that this is just the beginning of a truly epic series, and I cannot wait to see what happens next. I gave it 5 stars. On a very different note, afterwards I finally got a chance to read Three Keys by Kelly Yang. This is the sequel to Front Desk, one of my favorite middle grade books, and I buddy read this with my friend Melissa, whose channel will be down below, and who also read the first book with me, so that was really nice. It's an Own Voices middle grade story about first-generation Chinese-American immigrant Mia, whose parents in the first book work at and live in a motel under very poor working conditions, and they help hide immigrants in the empty rooms at night. This installment shows Mia and her family in a better place, but the motel still isn't getting a lot of business, and there are new immigration laws being proposed in California that could jeopardize the future and education of Mia and her friends. Content warnings for bullying, death of a grandparent, classism, xenophobia, deportation and anti-immigration rhetoric, racism, hate crimes, and racist comments. I'm gonna try and keep this brief because it's a sequel and I don't want to say too much, but I will say that Kelly Yang has once again struck perfection. This is yet another masterclass in exploring racism, classism, immigration, poverty, and the importance of community, especially for young audiences. Finding your community and giving back to it is such a huge part of these books, and I think it's important how the story shows that community doesn't just mean the people who look like you or have the same experiences, but rather the people who are in your capacity to help and reach. Mia's community is multi-ethnic. It's people of all ages and backgrounds, people of different skill sets, but they're all united in realizing that what they have to offer each other is worthwhile and important. I also really appreciate how even the most antagonistic characters in this series are not beyond learning, growing, and being better, even if they're not perfect. This is such a heartwarming and hopeful book series about growing together, breaking down barriers for the people behind you, and not being afraid to hold the US to its promise of being a place of opportunity, even when doing so is difficult. This book covers so much more than I can express in a single review. It explores creating safe spaces, mobilizing your community, learning financial literacy, dealing with trauma as immigrants, and I think the third book is going to explore how Mia's family reckons with Americanization when going back to visit China. No matter what, I know it's going to be fantastic, and I gave this one 5 stars. And the last book I finished in May, and my Patreon selection for the month, was my arc of The Chosen and the Beautiful by Nhi Vo. This, like every other queer book in the world, just came out on June 1st, and it's from Tor.com. It's an Own Voices retelling of The Great Gatsby with magic, queerness, and a narrator who is Vietnamese. So it's definitely an improvement on a stale classic. It's entirely retold from the perspective of Daisy's best friend Jordan Baker, who is a Vietnamese immigrant and orphan who was rescued by a wealthy American family. So she's privy to all the most glamorous and exclusive parties of the Jazz Age, which is how she finds herself roped into Gatsby's schemes to get Daisy back. Content warnings for alcoholism and intoxication, infidelity, parental death, murder, racism and outdated racial epithets, references to suicide and abortion, some descriptions of vomit, graphic injury, and deadly car accidents, and some scenes containing graphic sex. I really enjoyed this retelling because it's very different from something like A Taste for Love, which takes a classic story and puts it in a whole new context. Instead, this retelling is going through the same exact events of the original story, but with a completely new narrator and lens, which inherently changes everything by definition. The added elements of magic and queerness are not just interesting updates that freshen up the story, but they feel necessary. They feel like a puzzle piece finally dropping into place, and they add so much richness and depth that is absent from the original text. By making pretty much everyone in the main cast queer, it reveals more about what draws them to each other. It's not just boredom, it's not just novelty or convenience, it's not just ulterior motives. It's because there's queer tension between them, and in that way the story takes what's implied in the original and makes it explicit. Plus, it just makes sense because Gatsby's famous for throwing these blowout parties where everyone's welcome and anything goes, which would naturally create a safe space in which to explore queerness. Basically, the story does what The Great Gatsby fails to do by acknowledging the historical existence of people who A, were not white, and B, were not straight. And the magic in this story is fascinating and beautiful, but also commonplace, to the point where magic has become its own form of currency and excess in this society. And there's also an exploration of how privilege, power, and wealth are their own forms of magic. When you have generational wealth, you can open any door, you can do anything, you can go anywhere, get anything you want, and make anything you want appear right in front of you. And what is that if not magic? And it's also really interesting because there's an implication that maybe Gatsby sold his soul to a demon and that's what got him his fortune, which reinforces how that much excessive wealth and lavishness is unnatural in some ways. I think Jordan is a great choice of narrator as well because she plays the role of the witness just like Nick did in the original, but there's historical precedence for why she would be considered secondary, and it's because she's a Vietnamese immigrant. She's kind of in this liminal space between worlds because her adoptive family is connected to the higher social circles, but she's not actually part of that world. She's a nice little exotic mascot, but she's not good enough to be welcomed in the ways that matter. Her friends allow her to be around because they consider her culture to be dismissible and inherently secondary to their own lives. It's just such a layered retelling that makes you think about the destructive nature of loneliness and makes you see the original in a whole new light. I do think it's a bit slow-paced at times, and there was a strange moment towards the end where it's mentioned that Gatsby is half Choctaw, and that threw me for a loop because that is never once explored in the book. What would actually be a really significant native cultural experience ends up coming off as an afterthought, and to put it lightly, I question that choice. But other than that, I think this retelling gives the reader so much to think about and gradually reveals more and more of itself to you the longer you sit with it, which is a truly remarkable feat, so I gave it 4 stars. So there you have it, those are all the books I read in May. If you've read any of these yourself, or if you plan to, drop me a line in the comments down below and let me know what you think. But that's everything I have for this wrap up today. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, educate yourself, be kind to yourself, take care of yourself, and I will catch you on the flip side of the page.